Sweet. All right, we are live. We are live here. All right, we're live in the Alchemix studio. I'm gonna just wait and see if we can get a couple people to join in here. All right, it's 5 o'clock, so we'll get started here. 5 o'clock Mountain Time, where I'm from in Denver area. And then I'm assuming this is going to start out small, and hopefully then we can grow, of course. But the idea behind this segment is just to allow people to submit their questions publicly. You can reach out to us on Twitter at Alchemixology, on Instagram at Alchemix Official, or just submit your comments on the live stream or any other videos. We picked some of each to kind of just read people. If you have any questions about cocktails, spirits, booze, mixology, anything like that, that's basically the idea. Just give me 1 second. I'm actually going to adjust the lighting really fast. All right, I'm back. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. Yeah, so a couple things. I wanted to just go over really quickly my story just before we kick this off and how this is all going down. And then if you want, you can submit your questions at the mediums that I just mentioned. So I was working as a head bartender in 2019, 2020. I mean, really all of the 2010s. But when the pandemic happened early 2020, I was in New York City working at a place called Papillon. This is in sort of in between the marketing and finance district in New York City, more marketing district. And actually, forgive me, that's not true. It's more like the east side. So anyway, when everything went down, decided to just pack up and come home. I really didn't see anything positive in that, coming out of like what was happening in the city at the time. That was obviously like the epicenter of the pandemic in a lot of ways. But since I've sort of, I'm just trying to find new, unique, and maybe creative ways to I don't know how you'd say, maybe find the interesting opportunities with it in the cocktail and bartending space without necessarily necessarily bartending a whole lot. So we just launched our Alchemix events recently, so we've been doing like events around the Denver area for now. I've done events with a partner of mine on the East Coast. So a lot of weddings and stuff like that. I started Alchemix in 2015 as a digital agency only, basically. And this is, you know, before everything that you see here happened. And at first, we were just running advertisements for bars, restaurants, and spirits companies. Basically, the idea behind Alchemix Agency was we would take the entire social media off the hands of a brand and run it all for them. And in between those two things, that's essentially how we've made money thus far. And on that note, I do want to just talk briefly about a couple of things. So there's a little bit of controversy about the video that we released called "Cocktails Are Over," and that had come at sort of dark point in my career and in my life. I'm not as so it was sort of like a product of the pandemic and all that, but it was really more. I'd actually done our first consulting job as a business. It actually went really well for the most part, and but just getting back and realizing I didn't really like any of my work, so I didn't love all the videos that we had put out thus far. And I mentioned why in the video, but the only reason why I bring that up is because going forward, I'm gonna be probably talking a lot more about the business related stuff when it comes to the industry, because there's a lot of that's kind of what interests me, and there's a lot of things that I'm perfectly okay with calling out. Um, so yeah, so that's the only reason why I bring that up. Now, I am pleased to announce that the website is finally ready. So if you are interested in sort of all the things we're doing right now, which is quite a bit, you can go to alchemix.co. That's .co, and check it out. The blog is there, so pretty much every video now has a blog attached to it. So as most of you know, we just launched our Whiskey Wednesday segment, and that is something I'm really excited about. Episode 2 is coming out tomorrow, so don't forget to set your reminders for that. We're covering Monkey Shoulder Scotch, and the production value only keeps going up. So I'm just really excited about things that are happening. In many respects, and part of that video before was like, I wasn't happy with our own production value. Um, but anyway, just to go back really quickly to pandemic times, I knew that I had wanted to take this to another level. So as soon as I got back, actually, after pretty much just seeing the entire industry decimated, especially in that city, which is unfortunately even carrying on now, I decided to work with a contractor because I'd long been interested in designing bars. Um, so I had the privilege to work with hand in hand with a contractor to design and build 3 home bars. 2020, during pandemic times when there was a big spike in consumer demand for like renovations and stuff like that. So I worked with a contractor actually that was only pretty much designing and building bars, and it was all mostly residential. But then luckily later on, like as I mentioned, we did our first consulting job. I had the privilege of designing a back bar as well. So I've designed many bars, but those are the 4 projects that have come to fruition so far. And so we're going to be doing a little bit uh, stuff a little bit more related to that as well. I just love this industry so much, and it hurt a lot to see everything sort of fall apart. And so, I used that time to just really better myself and figure out creative ways that we could go about, um, working in the industry without necessarily being a bartender. part of my frustration in the cocktails are over video was that there was just a lot of charlatans and people treating this as simply a hobby, and I think and I mean, to me it's a profession, and that's not a knock on anybody who likes just making drinks at home or whatever, any other creators, but I just kind of look at it differently. So I wasn't actually blaming anybody else. I think a lot of people got that idea, but it was really actually more of a frustration with my own work and my own um, efforts and our own projects. And so, that being said, I decided to change things up. And I think that going forward, I'm interested in talking much more about like the business side of things as well. I'm not saying it's all going to be business or anything like that. It's just like, it's just that I'm interested. I'm really the only person. Alchemix is the only company that I know of that is taking a sort of inside out approach to it all. And again, that's not to like knock anybody else or any home bartenders. I think it's great when people make cocktails at home. It's just that my unique perspective that I can give personally is from being in the industry for a long time, and being so in love with like every aspect of bars and restaurants, that there's so many things I want to do, that's kind of going to be my message. And I understand not everybody is going to want to be that way, and that's obviously totally fine. So on that note, there's a new segment coming out as well soon. It's Alchemix Bar Reviews. We've been to 7 cities now, and I'm about to go to the East Coast again to consult, and we'll hit probably a few more there. The first episode is fully ready and will probably come out next week. And that's just where we travel around the world and, review cocktail bars. Like I say, an inside out approach to the industry, and kind of give you an insider's perspective about where bartenders and stuff like that say to go. So I'm very excited about that. Just know that, going forward is this going to be a little bit different. I think as the founder of Alchemix, we're doing so much right now, and I'm trying to do so much maybe a little too fast. And so unfortunately, when it came to like the photography and the videography for our own content, we kind of sacrificed quality a little bit to put out a lot of stuff very fast. So that being said, that's just a little bit of housekeeping. I want to jump right into the questions. You can submit your questions here. We have some from Instagram, Twitter, and the YouTube comments as well. So yeah, going back really quick to part of the reason why this all started. By the way, I'm drinking a fantastic gin and tonic right now. This is St. George herbivore gin with a long clear ice cube that I cut from this massive block we used this week to make sake cocktails, and our Whiskey Wednesday segment coming out tomorrow. And that's topped with Q. Actually, everybody knows I'm a big fan of Fever Tree, but this is topped with Q's light tonic. So there's like a lot less sugar in that. Spritz with a lemon twist, and then Bob's your uncle. That's what it is. So there's a couple of things that really kept me going through the whole cocktails are over thing and all that. Comment from on YouTube from a gal named Ali G says, content like this ensures newcomers are set for success in our bartending careers. Having been a barista for 5+ years, I've been working closely for 2 of those years under a bartender to learn the works, but was deprived of any creative freedom. Although in 2 days I start a position bartending at an upscale bar in my city, I'm incredibly nervous but motivated. Informative videos like this have helped prepare me as well. Thank you for sharing. So most of these are going to be questions. I'm not going to only read things like that are like all, I guess compliments or whatever it might be. But Ali G, thanks very much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. That was one of the things that kept me going through like that sort of just like period of kind of feeling like cocktails really are over, which by the way, I stand by, and there's going to be a volume two with a friend of mine soon. There's obviously nuances to that, but the vast majority of people don't really care about having a great cocktail. But the I really appreciate this comment. I know there's not really a question in here, but my advice would be I often I'm actually going to be I don't want to announce everything yet, but I'm actually going to be looking at spaces soon for between me and a partner to potentially, I'm not saying 100%, but start a bar. Obviously, we want to wait out for, all these times. But I had this idea early on of taking somebody who never bartended before in their entire life and turning him into like an amazing mixologist, which I actually, in my opinion, is actually easier than trying to teach an old dog new tricks. um I know that that was kind of similar to the story of employees only. The owner hired, I forget the head bartender's name now, which is a shame, but they kind of they kind of lost me along the way a little bit, but they have a great story, great establishment, all that. But the owner hired an ex-military guy who'd never bartended before, who in the early days, I think, like early 2000s, when cocktails were starting to boom again, and well, they were really revolutionary, kind of on the forefront of like the craft cocktail revolution, along with some other places. But he took essentially a guy that had never bartended before, who was ex-military, and said, "You have discipline, so we're going to turn you into like the greatest." I've been a manager, um, and we've hired for this company and all that, and I'll say that the attitude is so much more important. The fact that you're watching and then you got a lot out of it, and you know, is so much more important, I think, than experience, frankly, in this industry. I hate to say it. I don't really think that's the case for all industries, but part of my frustration was like, well, first of all, in the US, especially right now, we have a labor shortage, right? So you can't hire anybody. You cannot be picky with who you hire. It's definitely it's definitely an employees market right now. So I mean, that's a huge issue, but the ones that do stick around are really, you know, doing, it's an amazing thing to do. A lot of them right now, unfortunately, it's just like their egos are inflated. And I'm mostly talking about places like dive bars, and I really don't want to like single anybody out. I go to places with amazing bartenders all the time. I think a lot of people tend to take this personally, but I would say I'm really glad to hear you started a new job, Ali. And I think that my advice, I hate to say this, is don't be afraid to move around, especially right now. You know, the first I think the first like 5 bartending jobs I had, I left every 6 months, pretty much. I don't think that I stayed at a job longer than 6 months, and I've been pretty open about that. I've been pretty open about that to employers and things like that, because I just knew the value that I brought to the table as someone who's willing to learn, like it sounds like you are. Excuse me. A little gin and tonic. And I would say just keep moving around until you find somewhere you're happy. There's so many different factors. One of my biggest frustrations of working as a bartender is there's so many different factors that have to align for you to be happy at a job, that if you find that one, just stick with it. I'm not saying you should just leave for the sake of leaving, but don't be afraid to bounce around until you find that job. And it every time you change jobs, you get a chance to reinvent yourself. Part of the biggest issues in this industry is incompetence of management and failure to recognize talent. And a lot of times just jealousy because people don't want other people to rise up. It's really bad. It can be as bad as the corporate world. It can be that cutthroat. So don't be afraid to bounce around. And yeah, just, keep up the great attitude and keep learning. Okay. For sure. The Sherry's Secret video. This was a cocktail that that I this is actually one of the first cocktails that I invented for a wedding on the East Coast when we did a wedding. Sherry's secret was for a gal who really loved whiskey, and that was a and Scotch Rob Roy, I guess you'd say, variation with a little bit of absinthe. It's really good. But Kitty Namite says, "Are you are you on muscle relaxers, bruh?" I've never taken muscle relaxers, but I was a massive stoner in the early days of my life. And luckily, I've since quit because I think I just fried so many brain cells that I wasn't able to handle it at some point. So luckily, I did quit. Certainly have nothing against it. A couple people on the team have um, started working on some interesting cocktails that combine CBD, THC, and alcohol. Um, but yeah, I think unfortunately, that voice maybe is carried over. I've always been very monotone. I actually am working on. I'm not. My voice is never going to change, but I actually am working a little bit more on trying to be little less monotone in videos. So you guys can hold me to that. Let me know how I do with that. 100-year-old cigar recipe. Damien from YouTube comments says, "I wonder if it smells like a cigar." It doesn't at all smell like a cigar. It smells like the peatiness of this Lagavulin, and it's frankly not. It's not that great of a cocktail. In all honesty, it's not bad, but that was one. The 100-year-old cigar was from our Isla Scotch cocktails series. And Isla Scotch cocktails are hard to come by. I think there's actually a big opportunity for those of you who want to innovate and work with Isla Scotch. There's not a lot of great Isla Scotch cocktails that are known publicly. Um, Part of the issue with Isla Scotch is very few people like drinking it neat, and it's so potent a lot of times that in cocktails it's used in like tiny, tiny amounts, whether it's a spritz or a float or like a penicillin, which is a very small amount. But I personally love drinking it neat. Unfortunately, this 100-year-old cigar, as great as the name is, I think that I remember that just came from like some chick out of Brooklyn who had a book, and I don't even remember what the book was. I think it was actually like Brooklyn Cocktails or something like that. Yeah, it was silly. I don't want to say that that was like a throwaway cocktail. That was just one of the few that we could find, I think, after doing a lot of research on Isla Scotch. That was only one of the few when I think at the time we were trying to do 7 cocktails, so that was one of the few that published that was published that was well known. So for those of you out there, there's a lot of opportunity for Isla Scotch cocktails. I would definitely think about that. Christine Camley, when we published the Toronto recipe. Yeah, this is kind of like an old-fashioned variation that goes up with a little bit of absinthe. She says, "One of my favorite Canadian." I don't need to read that part. I've just started using Lot 40 Canadian rye. Why do I give Canadian rye a pass so often? I usually go to US favorite selections, but we have some good whiskey. I'm assuming that means she's Canadian. This is a fabulous cocktail. I've never tried Pendleton, but I'm going to pick up some right away. The spirit chosen can make all the difference no matter what cocktail I learn about the old fashioned blue. Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, so yeah, that was interesting. So a partner of mine in the consulting space who knows everything about everything inside the industry, who owns what in every portfolio and all that. So yeah, we made this with rye whiskey, Canadian rye, and I believe this recipe was originally different. It was published differently when it was originally published. But yeah, we made this with Canadian rye. I've actually never heard of Lot 40. I'm not sure if I could even name another Canadian rye off the top of my head. But one of the things that he informed me was that Pendleton is actually distilled in Canada. but then it is like shipped to Oregon, I believe, where it's bottled, maybe even aged and bottled, and then distributed. So what he told me, and I don't know if there's any Canadians out there, you can let me know if this is true, is that um, Canada Canadians don't really consider Pendleton to be Canadian whiskey, especially like the people in the industry or whatever. I don't know. Let me know if that's true. I don't know. I found that out after we made the video. Frankly, the Toronto calls for like a Canadian whiskey. So I think that was just like the only one we could find in my area on the market. The cocktail is good. It's definitely worth a try. It certainly doesn't need to be made with Canadian whiskey, although other than the name of it, it's Toronto, but it also has Fernet, and that's obviously Italian. So yeah, I don't know. Okay. As I was discussing before, the cocktails are over video. Malik Storm says, "Why throw shade on other creators, man? This is so sad." Yeah, I actually never did that. That's wrong. I never. Though I've used examples. I've never called out anyone at all personally, except somebody that committed fraud against us. So enough about that. BS. Same video. Beatrice Foxworthy. Why do you hate life? Yeah. So we did our I'm gonna need a drink for this one. So the story goes, we did Alchemix did our first consulting job in Philadelphia a few months back, and that's kind of when we had that leave of absence there. And I'm pretty proud of the cocktails that we created. We actually it was I don't think I can actually name who, but I will be releasing a video soon about Alchemix consulting and how it all works. Now, consulting job basically in the industry, for those of you who don't know, could mean a number of things, but basically what you do is when we consult for a bar, like this one in this case, and most of the time it's like a new bar, you go in and you're part of the hiring process. So you hire the bartenders, sometimes bar managers, you train them all. You train all the bartenders on how to make cocktails, all the nuances. We actually do bar design. Now, I'm not talking about like the actual physical, well, physical, but the like actual interior design, but that's like back bar design. It's very important that your back bar and your wells and sinks and stuff is designed and placed by someone who's actually a bartender, because you need to set that up for efficiency. You train the management on how to report back to the owners on inventory and profit margins. But the thing that makes Alchemix unique is that we'll go in and we'll actually make so we'll do all of that, but then also make training videos for basically every position, so that when the owners or management hires new people, they can literally just send them over to an online portal, and then everything gets taken. I mean, they have all their training right in front of them. So anyway, we do our first consulting gig. I'm very proud of the cocktails that we put together. We actually worked with mixologists in India, because the owners were Indian, and we were trying to translate basically cocktails that worked really well in India. So there's a lot of like herbs and spices that we didn't have access to here, or that were dried or something. So it's very challenging. But I'm proud of what we put together. I might be able to name this in the future. Right now, I just don't know. But we sous vide turmeric into rum, and it was very advanced. We did a great job, and I was really cool. It was in Philadelphia. There's not really a lot of stuff like that. So I was really happy about it. I spent a couple of days in New York while I was out there, and I saw what one of my best friends was doing. He's the head bartender at a place called Analog. He's doing an amazing job. And I was just really pleased with what I saw at the time. It kind of made it look like the industry was making a comeback. Um, but then I get back, go on YouTube, and the first thing I see is like a cocktail that's modeled after like something from The Simpsons or Family Guy, or I don't really remember what it is. So that was just like very disheartening to me. And I kind of, unfortunately, just feel that there was like the people are at home who most of these like bartenders are trying to appeal to, because it's just frankly a bigger market. they're not really getting the best versions of cocktails because they're being told information that is just simply ridiculous, you know? So that's what that is. I don't hate life, Beatrice, but that's the explanation for why you might say that. Doug Cheese, did somebody hurt you? No, the same answer. That's all the same thing. So, Dexter, YouTube comments, what other dimensions does muddling sugar add to a cocktail that simple sugar doesn't? Or is it just a performative thing? It's definitely a performative thing. Um, it's also a historical thing. Muddling a sugar cube was always the traditional way to make an old fashioned. There is there is an argument for if you muddle the sugar cube instead of using like any sort of sugar syrup, there's an element of like it'll evolve as you drink it and it'll get a little bit sweeter because like oftentimes when you do that, it's not the sugar is not like completely diluted into your bitters and whiskey, like in the case of an old fashioned, for example. So it's performative, it's historical, and you could make the argument, I suppose, that it does add like layers to the drink as you drink it because it will sort of evolve the taste. Now, look, I don't know. I'm not exactly someone that wants the taste to evolve unless it's like maybe a gin and tonic. I actually sort of, for some reason, tend to enjoy like the process of it diluting, I guess, maybe. And there's other, crushed ice, like tiki cocktails, you could say the same thing. But in the case of like an old fashioned, I most of the high level cocktails bars that I've worked at have been we've used Demerara sugar syrup. I just think brown sugar syrup pairs way better with whiskey. I don't think you could dispute that. I don't really like only simple syrup, but yeah, I think that there's frankly it's just much more practical, especially for speed. But like if you are just at home and you're trying to impress a guy or gal or wherever it may be, then yeah, you soak the cube and the whole thing. So I'll just totally leave that up to you. Um, Robin via YouTube comments says, "What other or sorry, that's the last one. Why do you shake for less time when you're using a big rock and more time when you're shaking with smaller ice cubes?" That's a great question. Um, if you read Dave Arnold's Liquid Intelligence, he's like brilliant at breaking this down. Um, I remember much of it, but not all of it. He could give you every single instance of when to use what ice and where. We tried to break things down scientifically when we were consulting, actually. So, in one of our training sessions for all the bartenders, we talked about how much dilution you should have on a per cocktail basis. And the way you figure that out is with a formula. So, it all depends on like what what cocktail it is and like the measurement of that cocktail and also how it's served, like if it's served over ice or not served over ice. um he even makes the argument in Liquid Intelligence that the ABV matters too. So like if you have the same ice but the alcohol is there's a stronger alcohol content in a particular spirit, for example, then you should be diluting it a little more to bind it together, sort of. So, if you, there's a pick up Liquid Intelligence, it's one of the important books of the industry, and he breaks down everything when it comes to ice. Now, the simple answer is basically if you have a big rock, especially clear, it's going to dilute slower. So you need to shake for a little longer. Now, if you're shaking with crushed ice, like chipped ice, like if it's the case of this girl Ali G, who sounds like she's just starting, and depending on what your location is, a lot of places, frankly, just don't even have access to like a cold draft or Hoshizaki ice machine, which is like the two main industry standards. If you're shaking with this like chipped ice, which is like that just nasty little stuff, um, you should be shaking for like 2 or 3 seconds and then getting it out of the ice as fast as possible. Now, if you have a big cube, that's the best way to create aeration and also chill it to your liking without over diluting it. I remember the first time I was exposed to this, I was actually at Angel's Share in New York City. And these guys are like magicians. And I remember they were stirring over like a big clear rock, which I do sometimes now too. They were stirring forever. And I'm like, why is that happening? And this was years ago. And then I think I asked him and he explained it all to me. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then if you taste, especially with like clear ice, there's certain ways you can make that at home, like with just like a cooler or something. If you taste a cocktail that is stirred over a big rock, clear, or shake, the same thing. It's gets it to the optimal chill point without over diluting mostly, and it'll also be much more aerated. That's one of the most important things of a shaken cocktail. So that's really interesting, and that's a great question as well. That's about all I have for today. We are hoping to continue to do these live streams, so please submit your questions. You can submit your questions on Twitter. Alchemixology is the name. On Instagram, Alchemix Official. Or if you leave, like a genuine comment in any of our YouTube videos, we'll try to get to those as well. In addition, I just want to remind people that the second episode of Whiskey Wednesday is coming out tomorrow. And that'll be premiering, and I will be in the chat to answer any questions or anything like that. So I'm really excited to see you all there. After this live stream, you'll have the option to actually set a reminder for the premiere. So don't forget to watch that. We can watch it together. That'll be cool. I'm really excited about this new segment. We started out with Buffalo Trace Bourbon. That episode is out, and then we moved along to Monkey Shoulder Scotch for tomorrow. And I think the idea is we're going to start out with bourbon, move on to Scotch, then do Irish, maybe then spend a couple episodes covering a little bit smaller categories. But from there, I think we're actually going to spend like an entire month on like a particular category. So like we'll do a full month on bourbon, a full month on Scotch, and then that way it'll allow you to learn about whiskey as in each particular category as we go over each particular whiskey. So I'm very proud of the segment that's coming out tomorrow. I do hope you like it. I think it's about as entertaining as it could possibly be. And I really appreciate all of those of you who have been like supportive through all this and followed us. So thanks very much. We will see you soon.